this August meeting. And first, I would like to recognize and say that we begun a new chapter here at UETN. I'd like to welcome officially with this first board meeting. I'd like to welcome Spencer Jenkins, who is the new CEO and Executive Director of UETN. Spencer, we'd like to welcome you, and we are glad that you're here.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Looks like we're getting a bit of an echo from Salt Lake. So Denise, you might need to turn your microphone off. It showed that your mic.
I just muted her. We should be good now.
Okay, great. Spencer, welcome here in this meeting. We also have a number of changes to board membership. And first of all, I'd like to welcome 3 new members of our board. And if they're here, I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves. First, representing public education, like to invite Taryn Kay, if she would please introduce herself.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to be on the board. My name is Taryn Kay. I am the superintendent in Grand County School District. And today I'm on a deck in Salt Lake City. So long story, but I appreciate the opportunity to serve and look forward to getting to know each of you.
Great. Thank you, Taryn, and welcome to the DIA board. We are glad that you have joined. Next up is Jason Strait in the meeting.
Yep, Jason, I'm here at UETN today, and I work at CUES. CUES is a regional service agency that serves Tinnick, Juab, North and South Sanpete, Sevier, Paiute, and Wayne school districts.
Great. Well, Jason, thank you, and also we appreciate your membership on our board and all that you are going to contribute. Our third new member is representing telehealth, and that's Kurt Lovelace. I'd like to invite Kurt to introduce himself, please.
Thank you. This is Kurt Lovelace, and I'm down in Kanab, Utah. And I should have thought to do like Taryn did, set out on the red cliffs, and could have made everybody really appreciate the landscape here. But I'm the CEO at the hospital, and we use telehealth quite a bit. And happy to be on the board. Thank you for the opportunity to serve.
Great, thank you, Kurt, and again to you, thank you for agreeing to be part of the board, and we'll appreciate your contributions. Just by way of information, terms have been extended for the following board members: Jared Haynes, myself, Greg Shearer, Chandra Johnson, and David Long. All have had their terms extended, and we appreciate each of those members of the board and how they have contributed, as well as to future contributions. So glad that they are staying with us. We would like to bid farewell and offer much gratitude and appreciation to the following 3 individuals whose terms have expired or they'll be leaving the board: Scott Langford, David Brotherson, and Ben Dalton. Each of those individuals have served faithfully on this board. We appreciate their service and wish them well. There will be certificates of appreciation will be sent to each one of those individuals. So once again, I feel as a board chair like this is a new day. It's a new chapter as we have a new executive director and many new members of our board. Such an exciting time to be part of UETN, and there's just great work being done. Appreciate all of the now existing and current board members, as well as staff and administration that are working so hard to help UETN be successful and serve our state. So very exciting time. We are going to move on now. We need to take care of we need to approve the minutes from 2 past meetings. If you remember, we had our regular board meeting on June 10th, and then we had a special board meeting on June 17th when actually we voted to approve the hiring of Spencer Jenkins. So with that, you should all have those two the 2 sets of minutes for both of those board meetings, and I will entertain a motion to approve those.
Move approval.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Tad. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes of June 10th and June 17th, would you please raise your hand? Any opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. Thank you very much. We will now move to our official action agenda item for this meeting, and I'm going to turn the time over to Spencer, who will talk about the FY24 legislative request and the action that will be before this board.
Thank you, Chair Wagner. We wanted to get in front of you a draft of what we are starting to anticipate will be our fiscal request going into the 2023 legislative session. The draft that's included in your board materials is an estimate. We're still sharpening our pencils, but it's giving us at least a bit of a marker on the field, if you will, as we start our conversations with the governor's office, with legislators and others over the next couple of months. We have some deadlines coming up. The governor's office, I think, has set a deadline in September for when we need to have our fiscal request formally submitted to them. And our plan is to get you an update between now and then as to the actual numbers that we plan to submit. But this, we feel like it was at least our due diligence to get in front of you these estimated amounts in these 4 categories. The first one, this is the $18 to $20 million of one-time funding that was appropriated last session. The legislature actually took action on it, but the funds have not been released by the U.S. Treasury. Lisa's been working closely with the governor's office of planning and budget on the process to get those funds drawn down from the Treasury. But from what we heard last week is there's a mental health facility that's in the way of all the other funding right now that was also approved. So there's a number of items the legislature appropriated funds against these ARPA dollars, which have not been released by U.S. Treasury yet. We are hopeful they will be released, and the type of use that UETN has identified for these funds falls well within the categories identified by U.S. Treasury. It's just a matter of us getting that application in front of Treasury. The second request is, this is the typical category around anticipated growth, both in licensing and network usage. That's both capacity and increased locations, increased use. And that, like I say, that amount, we hope to refine that in the coming couple of weeks. Same thing in telehealth. Now, one of the things we're looking at here is we're trying to raise a policy question around how telehealth is funded. Right now, UETN charges providers to access the network. And Matt, tell me if I'm getting this incorrect, but what we're hoping to do is sort of advance a request to the legislature to see if they'd be willing to fund fully that charge we make to the providers. Now, we get that that's slightly different than what happens in education, where these are private providers versus public education providers. But I guess I look at it similarly to charter schools, where those have been fully funded on the education side. And so it's more of a policy question. If the legislature is willing to fund it, to fund those providers' connections or access to the telehealth network. So that's a big share of that request. There's also school-based telehealth services. That's, I would say, is in a pilot phase right now, but there's expanded interest in that. As you well know, the primary use or service there would be mental health services, which is a growing platform in telehealth. And then the final one is equipment refresh. A lot of that is equipment to maintain the network. That's coming from Jim's group. There's a lot of equipment there that needs refresh and updating in connection to the actual connections of the network. So it's separate than the network growth and operations section. Like I say, all these numbers, we're going to refine these, but would be happy to take any questions. And if I might, Chair, allow Lisa to correct any mistakes I might have thrown out there. Lisa, was there anything you wanted to add or clarify?
No.
So Spencer, I just want to be really clear on what's coming before the board, and then we'll open it up to questions. I understand the explanation that administration needs some numbers now to present to the legislature, and I see that it's being described as pro forma. And then there's the question of ARPA too. So what we're approving in essence is a draft or a start. Will you be bringing back at some point then later this fall the final version that still may or may not include the ARPA funds? Or do you want to talk a little? I just want to be very, very clear so that the board, especially since we have new board members who maybe are not familiar with how this budget process works, I want to make sure we understand exactly what form we are approving.
So you described it very well, Chair, that this is a draft pro forma, and we do plan to get you exact numbers before we send those to the governor's office for their consideration as he formulates his budget priorities in anticipation of the 2023 legislative session. So that should happen hopefully between now and the first week of September, as we work with them as well as the legislative fiscal analyst office on refining these numbers. Now, I would say those will probably be our most formal numbers as a board. But as you all know, as we get closer to the legislative session and to the session itself, sometimes those numbers get tweaked based on different political winds. But these will at least be what we would formally submit to the governor's office.
Okay, so we have in the past, we have been known as a board to hold a special meeting in the September timeframe to officially approve the request, especially if we can't wait until our next meeting, which is in October. So certainly we can leave that open.
Yes.
Spencer, if that is something that the administration feels like needs to be done. But with that explanation, why don't we open it up to questions now? Is anyone? Let's go with Tad first.
Yeah, so I'm not sure, Matt, if you've been part of the conversations, but there's been some idea of the concept of providing telehealth access to the public at libraries. So you mentioned schools, but also in public libraries. Now, I don't know if that requires any funding necessarily, but just kind of throwing it out there as something that should be on the radar. And Matt, I'm not sure if you've been part of those discussions or have any thoughts about that, but and it is a very nascent conversation. So I just wanted to put it on the radar.
Yeah, thank you, Tad. We have been part of those discussions through the NRTRC grant in a few other states, and they have received funding. Washington in particular has state funding to do kind of pilot projects of telehealth in libraries. There's a number of different ways they're doing it, establishing kiosks that patients can actually go into. But it requires, library staff to be trained. They have to clean the rooms after each visit, has to be secure. So we haven't had many conversations with the library system in Utah at this point, but it is on our radar.
Great, thank you.
I had a question on item 4. How do we do equipment refresh? I know that that's one-time money. Do you have to go each year for equipment refresh and request for one-time money, or is there any way that we could get ongoing money so that that could be covered when you need it?
Steve, I'm sure you're aware of this conversation, but we had thought we secured $3 million a year in ongoing that would cover the equipment refresh that was approved by the legislature in the spring of 2020. And with the uncertainty of budgets and other things, that was withdrawn through the early parts of the pandemic. And we've talked to Spencer about that. We'd like to go back and be able to address that. And it would be very helpful if we could get that as ongoing funding.
Okay.
And I'll just, to clarify, there was, I think some iterations in FY19 and 20 of both ongoing and one-time funding. This is just a reflection of what it would cost one time, but I think, Steve, your question is a good one. Should this be ongoing funding? I think at the end of the day, we'd prefer it to be.
Good.
Let's go to Patty.
Good morning. I have a question, and I'm also hoping that this can maybe be a brief teaching moment for some of our new members on the board on item number 2 with the network growth and operations. So part of that request is with those private providers. Can you explain to some of our new board members what that looks like in terms of funding? How much does UETN take in right now in providing those services, and the difference between the public education, how that's delivered, and those private providers? So just a little bit more information so that people understand what that request really is.
Sorry, Patty, did you say number 2, the network growth? Okay,
Yes.
So that's a combination of both the growth in network in a number of forms, and technical people step in, but both in the number of connections, the speed of those connections, and the number of users on those connections. And so it's kind of a threefold capacity increase. Included in that request also is licensing charges. As I think we've discussed over the last several years, UETN has paying for more and more statewide licenses. And as those licenses come up, there's some need for ongoing funding to maintain those licenses. As for the actual numbers, Patty, I don't have those in front of you, but we could certainly, in front of us, I could certainly get you actuals of what this increase is in connection with the overall outlay of operations, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, it and also that piece about what's going to public, and then that support for private providers as well.
Okay.
Let's go to Kurt.
So I just on the first item, the ARPA funding, that's a one-time fund, and it looked like it was previously funded in 2021, but then we ended up not apparently getting those funds, and so it's kind of maybe carried over to 2022. But what types of project? I mean, that's the largest budget item on there. So what types of projects would be included in that category?
I think Lisa would be best to speak to that.
Yeah. On the ARPA projects, and I'm going to add, it's actually Kelly and I've worked on the request for the ARPA, and they are UETN projects. There was a large, we had requested for enhancing the infrastructure, expanding the IRUs, additional IRUs going down to UVU, hoping to get ultimately down to St. George, a separate route, moving those up to 400 gig. There were, we had some monitoring tools regarding the network monitoring tools. I actually should get the list out, but they were all UETN related. About 5 million of it was actually for telehealth. And they were to put in, and Matt, they were the devices you wanted to put into the schools. The telehealth request. And
Yeah,
what's-
there's two big things, and one relates to Kurt directly that I just wanted to mention real quick is all the new equipment that goes on the end of your circuit. So your firewall and your switch. We're hoping to be funded for all the sites, all that new equipment with ARPA funds, as well as the equipment for school-based telehealth.
And the one thing I want to say that has happened with the ARPA dollars, because we are working with the governor's office, is that they did turn around and part of like there was probably about $4 million going out to the schools, and they told us it didn't qualify for the capital project fund of ARPA dollars. So we actually pulled it out, and they suggested we put in additional growth within UETN. We've done all that. So I think there's going to be some changing how it looks at the very end, because we did enhance and then we actually added a couple additional IRUs and everything else in equipment. So and we ended up pulling the telehealth, and I've been work. So we've got a lot of work to see what happens regarding when the governor submits it to the U.S. Treasury Office. That's what we're waiting for right now. And they've taken one preview at it. The U.S. Treasury gave us some comments as to what they wanted pulled out. And they wanted to most of, with the exception of the firewalls, most of the telehealth portion was pulled out. We resubmitted at the same dollar amount, but to enhance our additional growth within UETN. So that's where we're at right now. And then I think we'll have to take a second look when we see what's finally approved.
2 points I would make there also, Spencer, is that that's showing up now for the new board members, but it was reviewed in previous board meetings, and the board had approved that for the previous budget. Just the fact that it hasn't been funded by the Treasury Department, that it's continuing to show up there. And the other is that as we put together the request this year, we took into account those ARPA dollars, and so nothing in our request for the coming fiscal year is asking for things that would compete with or overlap with those ARPA dollars.
And I would say just real quickly on these ARPA, the reason why we've left it there is just as a kind of placeholder to say we anticipate this to be cleared up in the next, hopefully the next few weeks. But we keep saying that. But and you know, despite the fact that they are different priorities, depending on how that amount comes down on the ARPA side, it could impact the rest of our request. So we felt like it was most important to leave it on as part of the request, because I think there's some important background context from the previous session sort of hanging on there.
So could I ask a question? Are we using then state funds to pay for private connections?
No. So just to quickly clarify on the private connections, I think there's something getting lost in that context. When I mentioned in telehealth, we're making a request to fund connections for private providers. On the education side, that's akin to charters. Charters are technically public, right, Patty? But they're a different kind of delivery than, say, the traditional public education funded model. That's the only comparison. So I hope so. I think I created some confusion in making that comparison. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, Spencer, can I just even clarify a little bit more? We actually provide service for like the private schools, such as the Catholic schools. We actually bill them their cost. When we actually work with Westminster, BYU of any sort, we actually bill them for their service too. So state dollars do not support private entities like that.
On the education side, and we're not requesting funds for
totally.
that.
And so we do bill them for their cost. And we do the same thing when it comes to software. If they're part of the licensing, because of the, you know, we can get the pricing of licenses. I do bill out the private schools, and those I'm talking about, like I said, the Westminster, BYU, or any of the private elementary public schools, not public schools. Elementary schools.
I just wanted to thank you for that clarification, because my understanding in the first part, because I wasn't listening carefully, I guess, was that it was for private providers across the state. So it's specifically to telehealth.
Yeah, sorry about that, Patty.
No, I was going, I don't know that we should do that. I don't know, I support that, but okay, yes, full support. Thanks for that clarification.
And again, it's a policy question, because on the telehealth side, it's not as clear cut as to who is public and who is private. So it's a little bit of a different context there.
And I apologize, Jared, but just because this is a part of this conversation, so sorry for jumping in line, but as we're going through this, and we haven't done this before, but I'm wondering if it might be helpful if we could see what policy changes would impact these types of funding. So if we were to get this, is there a policy change that's connected to it or necessary? That might be helpful as when this gets fleshed out all the way.
Okay. That's a great suggestion.
Yep, let's go to Jared, please.
Thank you. And I had a question on number 2, but also on number 3 related to the conversation we've been having. I think it's becoming more clear to me, but on the funding to cover, let's see. Where was that? To provide funding for telehealth private providers, is that what it was? The third.
Yeah, under number 3.
Yeah. I was just trying to understand that a little better. You mentioned that there's not a lot of difference between private and public providers on telehealth, and is there kind of some thinking that it would be appropriate to cover some of the private connections, or I just was curious what the politics will be around that.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, let me give a little bit more detail. So we only have one for-profit organization connected to the network that's a healthcare provider. They don't receive really any benefits from state or federal funding from USAC. All the other healthcare organizations connected to the network are nonprofits. A number of them are public health departments. And so we bill them every month a percentage that for their network connection that's not covered by USAC funding. And what we're talking about doing is covering that percentage. It's 35% of their connection costs. We're looking at covering that with state funds to support these small independent rural providers.
Okay, so the rationale there would be to make it more accessible for the public, and okay. And then the other question was on number 2, the staff retention. I assume that that is an effort to keep compensation market competitive with things that are going on in the market, inflation and so on.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Before we see if there are any final questions, I do want to jump back to the first point that Steve Hess asked about, and that's I'm wondering if there is interest with the board to officially request that number 4, the equipment refresh, that be changed from a one-time request to an ongoing request. Spencer, you had said that made sense to you, and Jim, that is something that we've certainly asked for in the past. Would that make sense to start out with asking that as ongoing instead of one time, because that would change the proposal before the board this morning? Spencer, Jim?
Makes sense to me. I would like to see that happen, really.
Okay, so maybe when we get to that point for a motion, the motion will be to approve this draft with that change that number 4 is ongoing rather than one time. Let's see if there are other questions. Patty, please.
I'm just wondering, I agree with that change as well. And I know that it's good to initially ask, and but hopefully it would be changed to ongoing. Do we have any concerns? And I know that we've already been getting some conversations from the legislature and legislative body about a possible recession and asking for funds and what that might look like and scaling back on requests. And I know that we're getting that for USBE. Are we looking at anything like that? Concerns here? Do we want to just go with this initial push, and then if we hear anything and then maybe alter that? I just wanted to throw that into the arena to see what concerns might arise.
Yes, that is one of the factors, and a big one. And we're hearing the same thing, that there will be some pressures due to some recession concerns. And so, again, these are markers for our budget. But the next several weeks, I think we'll all get more clarity on what the budget picture will be.
And Patty, we're actually going to be meeting with the governor's analyst and also with fiscal analysts in the next 2 to 3 weeks on both of them too. And they will actually give us their comments, whether share their feelings and thoughts about our.
Who is the fiscal analyst assigned to UETN that works with UETN? I know in education we have Ben Leishman.
Wait, well, that would be with the governor's office, or with the fiscal off with the
governor's office.
The governor's office. We have James Bowman. James. No, it's James.
Yeah.
I better take a peek at his last name. But we work with James, and he's actually I've talked to him yesterday, and we're going to go ahead and meet up with him. I'm hoping actually next week. I'm doubling checking what my
And the legislative fiscal analyst, yeah, and the legislative fiscal analyst is Yvonne Jomboff. He's the staffer for the IGG committee, so it's different than Ben.
Hey, any other questions?
I put my hand up, but it's easier to just push mute. Nobody else is up there. So yeah, if it comes to recession talk and possible scaling back, would there be a need to prioritize these, or maybe that would come in another iteration?
So typically, the final product that we've had, there have been priorities as part of that document. Spencer, will that be the plan again?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And then on the equipment, as far as one-time ongoing, is that a pretty consistent annual ask there over the last several years? You're looking at 2 to 3 million one time.
It's been, when you say it's been pretty consistent, that's what
That's
based
I believe
on.
that's why we
Yeah.
really looked at 3 million as that number, is that comes in right around there.
And I know the last, a couple of years or so have been good years for one-time asks. So I don't know if it's gone up the last couple of years, and what we might look at is a palatable ongoing amount there. But no, I'm in favor of ongoing if they'll do it. UETN is a very equipment intensive service that's provided.
So as the board can see, this is a very fluid discussion. And there is a lot involved. Once again, I do want to stress that the board will have an opportunity to officially approve the legislative request, the final legislative request or budget request, I should say, that goes to the governor's office, as well as the legislature. All that new board members know that typically in the past there's been very nice printed publication that's also been made with these requests, something that Spencer and his team can take, but something that we as board members can also print off and take and use with various legislators. So that will be coming this fall. Also, this is right now, it's very fluid. It's in draft form, but I think what Spencer is looking for is just, are they on the right track and do they have the board's support? So seeing no other questions, I will entertain a motion then, and whoever does if you're supportive of changing number 4 to ongoing, please make that point in the motion.
Chair, I'll make that motion that we approve the pro forma request with the change in number 4 to ongoing for equipment, and then possible review of the final budget when it's ready in a meeting if we need to have a special meeting for that.
Great, thank you, Jared. Is there a second?
Second that.
Thank you, Steve. Any discussion? Or additional discussion? Okay, those in favor of the motion as stated, please raise your hand. Okay, I can't see the rest of the board room there at UETN, so I'm assuming the board members, Spencer, that are sitting across the table, there they go. I wanted to make sure their hands were either up or not, depending on their choice. Okay,
We're for it, Robert.
Okay,
We're for
any
it.
opposed? Okay, the motion passes then. Thank you all very much. Very good discussion. We will be taking some time in October to really lay out and explain, especially for our new board members, how the budget works and what these items are. So we thank you for your support and faith in the administration as they go forward with this draft. We will, those are our action items. We're going to now move to the discussion portion of the agenda, and I'm going to turn the time to Laura, who will be talking about policy maintenance.
Hi, everyone. So you have in the board materials a chart with a list of all of the policies that the board currently has. Some of them are procedures. And this is really just an information item. So it's an inventory of all of the policies. Some of them we're required to have an annual review and action by the board, and most of those are related to public broadcasting, where it requires annual review. The other ones, we've set a rough target of every 5 years doing a review just to make sure it's current and the board is still in agreement. And especially since there's new members on the board, this is worth bringing up again. So you'll see on the chart the year that policy was adopted, our ballpark cadence, which is usually 5 years. So the target year that should be reviewed. And then basically we're behind a couple of years because of all of the things that have been happening. So you're going to start to see some of these policies come forward. Some of them will need to be updated if the information is incorrect. Some will just be similar to what has happened before. And then the other thing to point out, so they're broken up into the different service areas. The other thing to point out at the bottom of the list are policies that are kind of perpetuating things that we have seen peer organizations do, or our staff has brought forward, or the board has brought forward. So I think you may remember a few meetings ago, there was discussion about having a board position on equity, diversity initiatives. And so that's kind of in the works. So it's just kind of a working list of policies that are being developed. So again, it's just an information item. I'm open to any input that you have, and there are links in that document to where the existing policies are if you want to take a look at that too.
So Laura, do you have any cybersecurity policies? And if so, where are they? Or are you, as a part of the university, have to be compliant with their cybersecurity policies?
So for our users, we have a terms of use policy and privacy policy that's posted on our website. For internal staff cybersecurity expectations, we would follow University of Utah. But saying that, if there are things that you see other institutions doing that we should adopt, that's exactly why I'm bringing this up. That's helpful input for us to have.
Now, there's a policy that's going before the State Board of Higher Education. It's a cybersecurity policy, and it adopts the CIS standard as the standard. And I wondered if UETN ought to be included in that in some way. if it's as a part of the University of Utah, we follow the CIS standard, but we ought to make sure there's clarification there so that if we did get a breach or something like that, that we could follow through and have the necessary guidelines in place to take care of that.
Laura,
Yeah.
if I can jump in real quick on that too. Steve, we do have a network and security policy that we've used for years for the healthcare sites, which references the university policy, but has some other specific items related to the cybersecurity services that we offer to our healthcare customers.
Okay. But I think we ought to dig into that a little bit and make sure that's clear. The risk environment has gone way up, and I think it just ought to be really clear as to how, if there were a breach with UETN, how that would be handled. I know that you're covered under the cyber insurance policy of the university, so I would assume being covered under that policy that you would also have to be compliant with the university cybersecurity policy.
Thanks, that's helpful. And I should have mentioned where there's a crossover with the Attorney General's office or the university legal office, the policies have all been reviewed and actually they've helped to develop them over the years.
Dr. Hunter, I have one question. The question I have is related to policies in the selection of materials. And I was well aware of, with EBSCO and UETN adopting policies that way. One question I would ask is, could we do a review of UETN's policies and tie that to the sensitive materials policy that the Attorney General has released for local LEAs to enact policy, and see how UETN's policy ties in with that selection of materials, so that we can ensure that the materials that our students through the Overdrive library are being able to check out would meet that standard.
Thanks for that. And I can give you an update on that. When that law was passed and the state board created their rules that were associated just in the last month, we have had legal review of all of that. And if you'll remember, there is a specific sensitive materials law that's specific to UETN. The new law that you're talking about is specific to LEAs, and we're not an LEA. So they reviewed it, they reviewed all of those, and we already have state law that was passed the year prior that's specific to our work. And I know we've also been talking about this, some of us through an email thread. The board has passed policy on content selection. If a member of the public requests a content review, we have a procedure for that that's all outlined in policy, and those are all linked on the documents there.
I've been reading them and looking at them.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, I've been reading them and looking at all the policies, and so just kind of getting up to speed with everything. So
sounds good. And Patty, your request was for a link to what? I'm sorry.
The law that's specific to UETN.
Oh, sure. I'll put it in there.
Yeah. And then adding on to that, Jason, I appreciate you bringing that up. As I reviewed the policies as well, I'm wondering, I think that I appreciate that they had the legal review. I'm wondering if we have those sound bites so that if we get public comment or the public asking questions specifically, if we have those common statements that we're all able to give consistently about what that connection is. So for example, if UETN is housing these materials, then it would be similar maybe to how an LEA at the State Board of Education, we review some materials, but then the LEA still has to review those materials in order to adopt them. And so I wonder if there's something like that, and if that's actually detailed or articulated somewhere about that secondary process where UETN is possibly the housing of, but there's still the responsibility of the, the secondary organization that's going to be accessing or using. Because I think just as with EBSCO, to Jason's point, that those questions will be coming our way. I'm already hearing it through the social media chats talking about that.
Yeah, I can work on that. If you wouldn't mind, Patty, if you have something, talking points that's been developed for USB or for K-12 that you could send as an example, that would be helpful too.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to the cybersecurity policy discussion. I appreciate where Board Member Hess is coming from on this. I've been reviewing the cybersecurity insurance policy that the state provides for us through risk management. I've also been looking into the cybersecurity document that we're asked to sign to prove that we have cybersecurity policy in place as LEAs. My question there is, it seems that these policies are coming from multiple sources, speaking directly with risk management and with the insurance provider. I did not get satisfactory answers from them on exactly what the policy covered, or if signing the policy was really going to do much more good than providing somebody to make phone calls when we have a breach and contact people that were in the breach. I am also concerned on the other policy that's being sent around to school districts. It's specifically with esports at this point, but it was given from somebody at the state. I haven't been able to figure out who, to the Ken Garf folks to send out to anybody participating in esports in the state. And I think we have a role to play here. I don't want to overextend us as an organization into becoming the cybersecurity providers for everything, but I think we can provide some leadership in terms of where you should be taking information and advice on cybersecurity from.
I agree. If they connect to the network, UETN network, there has to be at least a minimal standard of cybersecurity for connectivity to the network. Whether we can dictate what cybersecurity is for every district, that's a pretty tall order. That's something they're going to have to do themselves, but there should be a standard for any kind of connection to the network. Since the weakest link can often bring down the entire network, that's probably something we need to look at carefully.
Yeah, and that's really all I'm asking for, is just a standard to guide districts. Obviously, they're going to make their own choices on that. But it really, with the Ken Garf policy that was going around, and it's not theirs, they were given it from somebody else. Questions of chain of command, who's responsible for putting that out, and really what are we supposed to be meeting as a standard becomes the question.
So if I could interject here, we already have a connection agreement. There are elements of security within that connection agreement. I would suggest that we need to review that and see where it needs to be modified, and just make that to the existing connection agreement and strengthen that and add security elements to that.
Steve, to your question, if I might, I wonder if some of these other parties are aware of the security requirements, or the LEAs and others who use the network are required to follow as a baseline, because there may not be that awareness, on the technical side versus some more on the business user side. And I wonder if there's a little bit of legwork we need to do to make sure that those non-technical folks know that those agreements, like you mentioned, Jim, are there.
No, I agree. I agree with what Jim has said. We've gone through our network connection agreements with each of the colleges and the universities, but also at the University of Utah, for instance. Every college has an MOU that they sign, that they agree to do certain things. It's heavily referenced in cybersecurity standards. we follow the CIS standard. And I think that would be a good thing to review all of those and make sure that we've got something that covers us there.
And it would encourage to review it with our users, stakeholders, and get that communication out, Spencer.
I wonder if that's something maybe we're presenting to the superintendents in October, that maybe we can at least reference and tee up to them and maybe do the follow-up from there.
Yeah, we could do that, and we're reviewing all policies right now because we had a group come into the university called Presidio, and they went after policies and said that there has to be some action taken on people who don't follow the policy. And in some of the policy, there is no indicated as to what the action should be. So we've got a lot of work to do on this. And from my role as the system CIO for the USHE, I think we can get our heads together and kind of get more uniform in how we're going to attack cybersecurity statewide.
And with that, the only other question I had about the policies as I looked at it was the connection policy. We've withdrawn the fiber connection policy, and I'm hoping that means that we're getting broader in our thinking about what a connection policy looks like and what ways that we connect to the network.
That one was withdrawn because it was quite dated. It was still back when we provided email services to all of the districts.
Understood. I'm just hoping our connection policy will be inclusive of all the ways that we're connecting now.
I agree.
Any other discussion? Well, Laura, please, Steve.
Are all these policies on the web so they can be seen and reviewed by the board?
Yes, there's links in the document, and then there's also a link to the part of the website where they're all located. And thank you, everybody, for your input. That's exactly why I wanted to bring this before the board. I appreciate it.
And Laura, thanks for the summary. This is very helpful and gives us a good idea as to what we need in reviewing.
Okay. Thank you. We will move on to our next discussion item. For you board members that have been on for some time, if there's one thing that I have been very consistent with as a board chair, if there's at least one thing that I have consistently done as board chair of the UETN governing board, it has been to postpone the UETN board retreat time and time again. So I apologize. We, of course, postponed it. For all new board members, you should know that this board has a tradition of getting together for an all-day retreat once a year as one of our meetings. We've done that in person. Typically, that's done in Salt Lake Valley, as it's more centralized. And it's a great opportunity not only to get together in person, but to be able to provide training, to talk about strategic planning. It's a chance to interact with members of the UETN team, as well as members of our advisory councils that we hear reports from every board meeting, but it's an opportunity to engage and interact and to have very good discussions. You can imagine with COVID, that was not possible. So there were about 2 years of postponing. And then we were quite excited to actually hold a retreat. Today was the original schedule. But I felt that with our new executive director, he would have only been on for weeks before the strategic planning, all-day strategic planning meeting, that it would be more fair to him and his team as he's really building his group as executive director to give them time. So I appreciate your patience. your flexibility as we once again postponed. So it was not in August, but we do now have it planned for October 14th. And we would like to make sure that board members reserve their calendars for that day. We intend for it to be in person. If any of you have concerns about that, we will ensure that there is a Zoom option. But we hope, if you're comfortable, that you will be able to attend in person. We're still working on the location. You can plan on roughly a 9 to 3 or 9 to 4 meeting on that day. A portion of that will be business related, so we could have some official business to take care of as it's scheduled for one of our regularly scheduled meetings. But really the large portion of the day will be spent as a board. And then we plan to invite our advisory council members. So I'd like to turn the time over to Spencer to have him share some of his thoughts and his vision for the retreat. Before I do that, let me give you just a broad outline of what it is that we are thinking about for the retreat. First of all, during the morning, because we have so many new members of the board, or members of the board that have been on the board for a couple of years and have never done a retreat, and we've never really taken the time and been able to take the time to really dig in, to really understand UETN, its core services, and the role and mission that it plays in this state. So a portion of the time that morning will be spent looking at that. I also want to take some time to do some board orientation, talk about our responsibilities as board members. What is our role as a board? How do we interact with administration and staff? How do we support them? As well as just logistical things like, if you're not able to attend a board meeting, what should you do? And so there will be some orientation and some board training. We'll also talk about the strategic plan that UETN has, making sure that the board's familiar with it, we understand it. Part of our responsibilities as a board is to advocate for UETN. And in order to advocate, we have to understand where UETN is and where we're going as an organization. So that morning, I think, will be a great opportunity for the whole board to participate. Really a good educational opportunity, an opportunity to discuss and share. Then the idea in the afternoon would be to invite our advisory councils and have larger discussions and more specific, I should say, discussions about the services and the roles that UETN plays, with the help of our advisory councils and getting their input and having some good discussions there, as well as also looking at the strategic plan going forward. And then as a board, we would conclude the day really with a recap, talking about going forward. What have we learned? What have we discussed? Are there takeaways? Are there action items as a board? Are there things that we want to do going forward? So that's a rough outline. I'd like to give Spencer an opportunity to share his vision and thoughts about the board retreat, and then open it up to a discussion or to suggestions that we can take as we finalize plans for the agenda. So Spencer, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just two thoughts. The hope for this retreat, and I think maybe as you stated at the beginning, Robert, with so many new board members, and I guess selfishly with myself, this may be a good time to take a step back and do some larger picture discussions. And our hope is there's a lot of things that are going on. For example, wireless is one that Jim and I were just whispering about, and some other things related to broadcast and other things that the board has talked about over the last couple of years that have long-term impact potentially. But even those, I was hoping we could even step back just a step from that and spend time as a board, as well as with the advisory committee's input, to ask really one major question, is whether or not there's a need for a real deep strategic dive into UETN's services. And not to say that that hasn't been done. In fact, there are 3 or 4 efforts currently underway with some consultants within UETN at some specific areas around the planning of those services and what maybe the next few years have in store for those services. But I'm wondering if there's even a deeper, kind of bigger picture look that needs to be taken around UETN services. Again, and I think partly what I want to base that off of is some of the activities we're thinking of is what are the perceptions and understandings of what UETN does for our key stakeholders, both you as board members and also with our advisory groups. And hopefully that can be some baseline conversation then as we regroup at the end of the day to hopefully answer that one question that you as a board may have. Is there more work warranted, or do we have enough kind of subject matter and understanding as well as current activity going on that we have a conclusive enough picture that we can convey this is the overall strategic picture for the next 5 or so years that's currently underway. So to me, that's, I think the big question is, do we need to step back, or are we in a good enough place that we're on a good trajectory? And it's just a bunch of new people like me and some board members that are just getting attuned to things.
Thank you, Spencer. Great thoughts. Other ideas that board members have?
Since we have a new executive director, I know we've done this with our internal services, our IT services at the university. What about a third-party review of UETN to just kind of get a baseline of how, somebody like Huron or somebody that would come in?
That's what I'm thinking of, Steve, when I talk about taking a deeper dive, kind of bigger pictures.
That they've been very helpful in pointing out things, and it's been really helpful to further develop and give strength to the strategic plan as well as to where we're going forward. So I would just throw that out. It's well worth the money just to have somebody come in and give it you. And I see Patty's note too, 360 review would be helpful.
We had a 360 review at USBE a few years ago, and we go back to it all the time, and we're considering doing another one to update. And the thing that's really, I think, beneficial is getting that stakeholder feedback and getting those individual comments, getting that qualitative and quantitative data, and analyzing those data sets to create that baseline foundation. As you step in, Spencer, we're all excited that you're here and being able to start off fresh and be able to say, here's where we're at and here's where we can grow. So I think that would be very beneficial.
Other ideas?
Robert, I had a thought here on this. I'm just curious on our mission, if we're focused on the right things. It seems like we're expanding a lot of services in terms of just pass-through budget items, and I'm questioning if we need to take a look at where we're facilitating things for the legislature or for different groups, if it stays true to what we're supposed to be about as an organization. We have lots of things directed our way because UETN is such a capable organization. I just worry that there's been some budget creep in some interesting areas.
Great idea. So it is always good to see where we're at related to the stated mission, making sure that we're staying true as an organization to what it is we're supposed to be focused on. I hearken back to the to the budget request at the beginning of this meeting and how important it is to remember the mission that we have and to be focused on the roles that we play, especially when it comes to things like budget requests. So thank you for that great idea.
The strategic plan itself, I think I've got it in front of me. It's 220 to 225. It's a page long. Is that right? Is that our strategic plan? Or is there more depth to that or more detail? Or is that pretty much it for now?
I would say there's a lot of detail behind it, but I don't know that it's been formally articulated as part of the strategic plan itself. There's, and again, I don't want it to imply that there's somehow not anything going on in this area. There's actually a lot, and that's what's been impressive to me as a newcomer operationally, that there is a lot that's going on. There's a lot of analysis that's been going on and a lot of reporting, but I'm not sure we've captured it in connection with the strategic plan as succinctly as it could be. And so I don't know if that's, I'm still learning whether that's operational or is it something that's also kind of strategically, potentially that could be refined a little bit. And again, I'm sitting here with some of my counterparts who are either going to swear at me right after this meeting or who knows.
Okay, let's go to Patty.
Yeah, I wanted to recognize UETN staff. I know a lot of times you don't get the credit that all of you deserve, and I'm not sure how many board members have taken the time to go in and look at the data and the benchmarks and the reporting, and they have it down by how close they are to their goal. They have percentages, and it's really really beneficial, and that would be helpful sometime to have staff come back and review that with the board to show, here's, regardless of what the mission or strategic plan is, really being firm and concise on that and doing exactly what you said, Spencer, tying everything back to it. But then those measures and how they're doing that, I think maybe that could be a monthly update so that we know where we're at in achieving the mission and goals.
Thank you. Not to put, we have put board members on the spot here this morning to come up with ideas. What we will do is we will send an email out, an email request out to members of the board and give you an opportunity to think about. I am especially, I think there are two groups that I would point out and say, we have veteran members of the board who have been on the board for some time, but we've not had a retreat. The question that I would ask you for the retreat is, what have you missed? What has been missing as we've had board meetings, as we've had discussions? What questions, internal questions, have come to your mind as you've thought about business and information and action items for the time that you've been on the board? Send those thoughts, send those questions, please, when we send the inquiry out. The other group are new members of the board. What do you want to know about UETN? What can help you be an effective member of the board? What areas of interest, what areas of focus, what questions do you have? So if both of our board member groups, the veterans and the new members of the board, can be thinking about that, we'll send that inquiry out here in the next week or two, give you a chance to think about it. And then please, we would welcome your thoughts as we put the agenda together. I don't want to move on past Christina's question in the chat room about fall break. Was there any concern about that date? That was our regular UETN meeting day. That has been on the calendar. We would just turn it into an all-day retreat. But any concerns about fall breaks? If there's one thing I've learned with this board, there is never a good time. It's always an imperfect date, but we would look for your flexibility, and hopefully not a lot of significant plans would have to change. Any concerns about that date? Okay. We will go forward then, and again, be looking for that inquiry email, and we will welcome your input and feedback as we work on that agenda. That will be Patty and myself, along with Spencer and his team will be working together on that agenda. So great. We will now move on to some reports. We'll hear from our advisory council leads. We'll hear from Matt first and then Rick.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a great advisory council meeting last Thursday. We started out by giving Spencer a few minutes to introduce himself to the advisory council. And then I had asked a few people from the Utah Department of Health to come and share a presentation that we helped fund a piece of. Just a little background, the Department of Health does an annual survey of a percentage of the population of the state of Utah. It's called the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. The reason I want to share it with you today is because in this survey last year, they added 2 questions. One question was specific to broadband availability in the home, which definitely applies to access to telehealth, but also access to school curriculum. And the second question that they added was specific to telehealth and asking individuals if they've had a telehealth visit in the past 12 months. I'm going to share my screen, and I just want to show 2 slides from that presentation. This is the result of the question about internet access in the home. And the second item here, 2.3% of the population said they have no access to internet at home. And I think that's important for us to consider, and we can drill into that data more with the Department of Health, kind of geographically where those communities are, where there's no access at all in the home. 6% said they have access, but they weren't sure whether it was through a cell phone or an internet service provider. Just about 50% said they have access through both a cell phone company and an internet service provider. 30% said they have access only through an internet service provider, and 8% only have access through a cell phone or mobile data plan. So UETN helped fund this question to be asked in the survey, and they'll continue to ask this question, hopefully for a number of years, so that we can continue to review what areas in the state are lacking internet. The second question, as I mentioned, was have you used telehealth in the past 12 months? Now, this was very interesting because when they reported this to the advisory council, they said, I think the term they used was, unfortunately, only 30% said yes. What's interesting about that is 2 years ago, that was about 0.4%. And so to have them say, unfortunately, only 30% said yes was interesting because of how much telehealth has grown in the last 2 years. 30% of the population of the state of Utah has used telehealth. And there were some additional questions, such as what they used telehealth for. 9.6%, which was the highest one, said they used it for a routine checkup. 7.2% said for urgent or acute health questions or concerns. So they spent about a half an hour reviewing the data, the results, and what it means. But I just wanted to share that with the board. We'll continue to try to fund those questions and track that data over time. I provided a director's report during the advisory council meeting. The first item was about the annual Deborah LaMarche Telehealth Excellence Award. We received 9 nominations this year, and we actually have asked our advisory council to review all the nominations and score them. And they did that, which we're grateful for them for reviewing them. They've selected a winner, and the individual hasn't been announced yet, but should be in the coming weeks. And we'll make a large press release and video announcement of that award. So provided an update for the advisory council about our network refresh, where we're at right now with the USAC funding and all the new circuits being installed. Let me pause for a second. Patty, I see a hand raised. Is that a question for me?
It is a question for you. Thanks, Matt. Can you go back to that slide that you had up there with the responses? And can you, review who did this go out to, the survey?
Yeah, good question. So this is actually a survey that every state does every year. It's funded mostly by the CDC. And the Department of Health is very scientific about certain demographics, populations, races and ethnicities that are asked to participate in the survey. It's meant to be a very representative sample of the state of Utah. It was completed by about 10,000 individuals. They told us their goal was 12,000, but so yeah, it kind of goes out. It's a phone survey. It goes to, basically a large representative sample of the state.
Is there any demographic information as well that goes along with this survey, or even some geographic information as well? Do you know?
Yes, there will be. Once all this data is collected and processed, they put it into a web-based platform called IBIS, IBIS. And it's publicly available data. You can go to the Department of Health's IBIS website and you can download the data, but you can also look at any indicator by geographic area or by demographics. And it's all built into their data platform. They didn't show much of that in their slides here, so I can't show you any of the demographics, but it should be available in the coming months through their website.
And will you go back, I think, one slide that talked about the internet access as well? Right here, yes. I'm wondering how, as a board, we can leverage this information, comparing it to the public education access to internet data as well, and be able to double down on our investing of where we really prioritize where funding should go or where any of that needs to happen. Especially if they have that geographic data in IBIS that we can drill down on, then we can be able to see if any of that matches up. So thank you for bringing this. It was very, I didn't want to interrupt your other part, but I just want to say thank you for bringing this and maybe bringing back some of those questions on the demographic and geographic information, or sending it out to the board via email might be helpful.
Yeah, I can do that for sure. That was actually my first question, is this 2.3% who have no access at the home, where do they live? What geographic areas do we need to focus on? So there's definitely a lot we can learn from the data. So very similar to that, I don't know if you've seen the announcement yet, but we've been working on a project for the last year and a half that included our advisory council. So I presented this to them. This is on our website right now. This is the new Utah telehealth claims dashboard. This is a really exciting project. I'm pretty sure we're the only state in the country that has done this. Within the state of Utah, we have an all-payer claims database. So all the insurance providers, including Medicaid and some parts of Medicare, are required to submit medical claims to this massive database. So we signed a data sharing agreement with the Department of Health to pull telehealth claims data. The data starts in January of 2019 and goes through, well, right now, March of 22, but every month it will be updated with new data. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I just want the board to see that it's available to the public. It can be used for all kinds of analysis, policy recommendations, tracking claims over time. You can see in January of 2019, and basically through 2019, there were an average of about 2,000 claims per month. At the height of the pandemic in April of 2020, there were 163,000 claims. And it's basically leveled off around 70 to 80,000 claims, which is about 16% overall of all medical claims in the state are virtual now, which is, I believe, about a 3,000 or 4,000% increase over time. So there's lots of other dashboards you can look at. This one actually shows the average payment amount for an in-person office visit compared to a telehealth visit. In 2019, there was a big gap in the difference of payment. And over time, that gap has narrowed to almost be the same payment amount for a telehealth visit. That's very specific to during the public health emergency, and that'll change once the public health emergency ends. Right now, it's supposed to end in October 13th. So we'll see what changes with payment, but that's why we've built this dashboard, is to be able to look at these types of data metrics over time. So we can look at age groups, we can look at local health department, rural, urban, frontier areas, as well as specialty types. So it's a pretty exciting dashboard. Again, I think a lot of information can be gleaned from it in terms of, policy recommendations and how telehealth is being used in the state. Other than that, we provided some updates about our NRTRC grant. We're hosting our large annual conference in September. If anyone's interested in attending, it's September 26th to the 28th in Salt Lake. And we've been collaborating with a number of other universities and states to build telehealth courses. We just did actually two courses for the state of Montana on telehealth, and we might be starting one for Idaho. We've done a few for the state of Washington that provide specific telehealth training around policies and regulations in those states to help providers. So NRTRC grant is doing a phenomenal job. They're always developing new projects and doing great things. And then similar to the last discussion with the board, we did start planning our retreat. The retreat will be October 6th, just the week before the board retreat. They would like to have an in-person meeting with a virtual option. Right now, we're planning on doing it from 8 a.m. to noon. And maybe my last comment is something I really liked that they suggested was to have hospitals and clinics that are connected to the network, to invite a few of them to come and speak about what it means to them to be a member of UETN, be connected to the network, and share their stories. Especially over the last 2 years, we've heard some incredible stories about expanding access to patients and telehealth and being a member of UETN. So we thought it'd be fun to invite them to come and share their story at the retreat, and might be something that the board wants to do, having some LEAs and hospitals and libraries come and share what it means to them. So I like that idea. We'll continue to plan the retreat, and I think I'll stop there. case there's any questions anyone has.
Thank
Okay, great idea. It's always good to see your customers.
Great report, Matt. Thank you. Any other questions for Matt? Patty, you were on mute.
I feel like I'm asking so many questions today, so I'm so sorry. But Matt, love this, especially that idea of having them come in and talk about the importance of UETN and that connectivity. And as we're looking at our funding request, one of the things that we know, and Brittany can tell you this as well, is stories stick with people, and being able to connect to the funding piece. So I just actually threw this in the chat. Since UETN has that amazing broadcasting center, I wonder if maybe some of those folks would be willing to do just like a brief how UETN is important. It'd be a nice PR thing on the website in requesting funding moving forward.
And Patty, I also see your question about the NRTRC. And I know there's a few new board members, so let me just address that question. So I'm the principal investigator for a federal grant that we received from HRSA to be the Regional Telehealth Resource Center, which is the name we've given it is the Northwest Regional Telehealth Resource Center. That's the acronym for NRTRC. So it's a federal grant. It provides about $325,000 a year to support training and education, disseminating, webinars and resources for providers in a 7-state region. So that's what it is. It's a federal grant that we received to support telehealth adoption.
Okay. Anything else for Matt? I would just say before we go to Rick, for the sake of our new members, these advisory boards are really critical. These advisory councils are really critical for us as a board. These are members who are professionally very focused in these areas. They provide us great information, recommendations. The two advisory councils are a great resource to us as a board. And so hearing their reports, hearing what they're talking about, what they're discussing, oftentimes is very timely for us as a board, things that we should be thinking about in the overall governance of UETN. So we thank both, all of the members of both advisory councils. Let's go to Rick next.
Thank you, Chair. The Education Advisory Council met last Friday, and we had another information packed meeting, as I think is much like the Telehealth Advisory Council. We did have an opportunity to meet Spencer, and for them to meet him and to be able to ask questions, and that went very, very well. We also had the opportunity just to get the preview of some of the budget issues that you discussed today, and I can say that the advisory council was very much in support of that direction that was being taken. I think the highlight of our meeting last week was a report by Lisa Coney on the Community of Utah Resources. It's a project that UETN has been involved with, and the purpose of that is to create educational resource sites for several of Utah's communities in that. The first of those was that of the American Indian, and I would highly recommend that you go to UEN's website and go to the American Indian resource page. It's highly informative with some just great resources that they have put together to be able to help educators and students at all levels understand this community, and then there'll be other communities that will be highlighted as a part of this project, and that We also have spent quite a bit of our time with several of committee reports. The Education Advisory Council is made up of representatives that also represent groups of people and out there in our communities in that. And so we have 5 reports that we typically have each time we meet. One of those is from the USHE Teaching and Technologies Council, and just the work that they do in being able to discuss technologies and that could be used in higher education and that, and they provide a lot of insight and direction to their members. Another group is we have the Utah Content Forum, which is also known as C Forum, which is made up of in public education of those that are involved in training and mentoring and coaching and being innovation specialists out there in the school districts around Utah. This group typically meets every month during the school year. It's a group that has grown significantly in size over the last few years with the implementation of the digital teaching and learning program. We used to have about 20 to 30 people that would meet every month. Now we have about 50 to 70 as that group has grown. Then we have the Utah Academic Library Consortium, which is just the academic libraries from the various state colleges and universities. And then another public education group is the Technology Coordinators Council, which is really made up of the IT directors, those more on that side of technology and that from the various school districts. They get together a couple of times a year, and it's a chance for UETN to share with them their vision and the things that they're working on, but also to receive a lot of good feedback about projects that they're working on and the needs that are out there in the community. I think there's a very symbiotic relationship between the UETN technical staff and the TCC. UETN is a great supporter of that group. And then finally, we have the state libraries and that group. And so we receive reports from each of these groups each time we meet, the things that they're working on, and that helps the UETN staff to be able to understand really what's going on out there in the communities that they serve. And that was our meeting.
Thank you, Rick. Any questions? Okay, Rick, please once again pass along our gratitude to the advisory council members. We appreciate their efforts. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.
Moving on, as is typically the case, the UETN staff is in the board docs as part of our agenda. Has some videos that board members can view on your own. So encourage you to take a look at those. They are great. And we have reached the end of our meeting, the end of the agenda. Our next meeting, once again, it will be our day-long retreat on October 14th. Just wanted to see if there are any other questions or comments from members of the board or from Spencer. Okay, hearing none, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Patty. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Hope that you have a great rest of your day. We look forward to seeing you all in October. Be looking just in case we do have a meeting for September. We would do that remotely just in case we need to do any budget items. So thank you all again.
Robert.
Yes, Patty.
There's a meeting for a couple of us scheduled a little bit
Yes.
later. do we want to have that earlier since this meeting ended? early?
Yes, so if they could just,
Okay.
yes, if we could just stay on, that would be great. We'll stop the recording and those can stay. Thank you all. See ya.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, everybody.